My name is Lila Grant. I am 34 years old, and for more than a decade, I've worked as a social worker in hospital emergency rooms. People often think of the ER as a place where doctors save lives, nurses patch wounds, and trauma surgeons perform miracles. But behind every patient on a stretcher is a family. And behind every family is a story, sometimes fractured, sometimes unspoken, sometimes darker than anyone in that room can admit. I was trained to sit with those stories, to hold the silence when words could not be found, to help people sign forms they barely understood through their tears, and to step in when children had no advocate. That is what they pay me to do. But one night at Providence Mercy Hospital, in Mobile, Alabama, I became a keeper of something else. Not just grief, not just trauma, a secret. And it still lives in me. I can't walk through those automatic sliding glass doors without feeling it. The smell of disinfectant always catches first, sharp, like citrus mixed with bleach. Then comes the sound. The relentless beeping of monitors, the groan of stretchers rolling over tile, the rush of shoes when a trauma call echoes overhead. Most people see chaos. I see patterns. A mother clutches her child. A man paces while his father is coated in the back. Families fracture and fuse again in the span of minutes. I read the faces, the silences between words. The ER teaches you what people say when they are desperate, and maybe more importantly, what they refuse to say. I wasn't born in Alabama. My home was New Orleans, or what was left of it after Hurricane Katrina. I was 15 when the water rose and my entire world drowned. My family never went back. We became wanderers, first in Houston, then Baton Rouge, until eventually I built a new version of myself in school and work. But that storm carved something into me. It made me a listener. When you lose your home overnight, when you watch neighbors climb to their rooftops for rescue, you learn that the human voice is all we have left sometimes. It is the tether. And so, I chose social work. Later, I chose the ER. Mobile reminded me of New Orleans in ways that unsettled me at first. The heavy air, the smell of the Gulf, even the distant rhythm of street music on certain nights when I left my shift past midnight. But I told myself I needed that reminder. I needed a place that felt like a home I'd lost. I had no idea that the real reminder would not come from the city, but from one family that walked into Providence Mercy on a humid July night. That evening had been busy, but not extraordinary. A car wreck on I-10, an elderly man with chest pain, the usual tide of broken bones, fevers, and frightened parents with toddlers whose coughs seemed worse in the dark. I was in the family consultation room, a small beige box of a space with 2 bright lights, waiting for a nurse to page me about a new intake. I remember fiddling with the clip of my badge when the call came through. Social work to trauma 1, the intercom said. My stomach tightened, as it always did. Trauma 1 meant the worst of the worst, the kind of case where families needed answers no one wanted to give. When I arrived, the patient was already inside. A boy, maybe 12, maybe 13. It was hard to tell under the blood and dirt. His leg was twisted in a way that made me look away before I looked back. A car had struck him while he was biking, the paramedic told me in clipped tones. No helmet, no ID. He'd been brought in alone. No parents. No guardians. Just a boy, pulled from asphalt under a streetlight. My job was clear. Find his family. I began with the basics, moving to the nurse's station, checking if a name had been recorded, scanning the few belongings he'd been brought in with. A backpack. A wallet that wasn't a wallet at all, but a folded piece of cardboard. Inside was a bus ticket stub and a scrap of paper with a phone number scrawled in pencil. No name. Just numbers. I copied them down, my hand shaking slightly as I dialed from the hospital phone. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered. Hoarse, guarded. I introduced myself. Careful, calm. I explained that a boy had been admitted. There was silence on the other end. Then the woman asked, almost too quickly, "Is he alive?" I told her yes, for now. I asked if she was his mother. Another silence. Then she said, "I'll come." No name. No explanation. The line went dead. I stood for a moment, with the receiver still in my hand. I knew then, as every social worker learns, that silence has weight. This one felt heavier than most. It was not shock. It was not fear. It was something else. Something unspoken, pressing through the static. And when she arrived, that weight would fill the ER like smoke. I went back to the boy's room. Machines hissed. Nurses moved around him with practiced urgency. His eyes fluttered open once, meeting mine, wide and frantic, as if he knew more than he could say. "You're safe," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if it was true. That was the beginning. A boy with no name, a number scrawled on cardboard, a voice on the phone that asked only if he was alive. And me, standing in the fluorescent half-light of Trauma 1, realizing that this case was about more than broken bones. It was about something hidden, waiting to be uncovered. Something that would leave me haunted long after the monitors fell silent. The woman arrived less than 30 minutes later. I was in the family consultation room again when the security guard called me over the intercom. She had come alone. No frantic footsteps, no rushing through the doors like most parents whose child is in Trauma 1. Instead, she walked slowly, her face composed but pale, her hair pulled back tight, clothes wrinkled as though she had thrown them on from a heap. She clutched a purse against her chest like a shield. When I stepped out to meet her, I introduced myself again, but she gave no name, just asked, "Where is he?" Her voice trembled only slightly. I guided her down the hall toward Trauma 1, feeling her presence behind me like a shadow. Families often lean on me in those first moments, grabbing my arm, asking questions I can't answer. She did none of that. She walked as if she already knew what she would find. When we reached the doorway, she paused. The boy lay on the stretcher, face pale under oxygen tubing, machines chirping a rhythm of fragile life. She didn't cry out, didn't rush to his side. She stared, her eyes sweeping over him with an intensity that unsettled me. Then, softly, almost to herself, she whispered, "He wasn't supposed to be here." I froze at those words. It wasn't the voice of a grieving mother, or even one in shock. It sounded like recognition laced with dread. I waited, expecting her to step closer, to reach for his hand. She didn't move. A nurse glanced at me, eyebrows raised, as if to ask if I knew who this woman was. I shook my head. Finally, I asked, gently, "Are you his mother?" Her eyes flicked to mine, dark and unreadable. "Yes," she said after a pause, but the word landed too flat, too practiced. I wanted to believe her, for his sake, and for hers. But something in me held back. The charge nurse came over, explained the boy's injuries, the tests being run, the uncertainty of his outcome. The woman nodded at every word, but her face betrayed nothing. When the nurse stepped away, she leaned toward me and whispered again, "Don't let anyone else in. No one." Her words struck me harder than I expected. "Is there someone we should be aware of? His father? Other family?" I asked. Her lips pressed tight. She shook her head. "Just me." We left Trauma 1 and moved to the waiting area. The ER was buzzing with the usual chaos. A man shouting about his broken arm, a toddler wailing in her mother's lap, the intercom announcing yet another code. Amid it all, the woman sat perfectly still, hands clasped around that purse, eyes locked on the floor. I sat across from her, silent, trying to create space for her to speak. Finally, I asked for her name, for paperwork, for the boy's identity. That's when her composure cracked. She hesitated too long. When she finally spoke, the name she gave was shaky, rehearsed. I recognized the pattern immediately. I've worked with enough families hiding addiction, abuse, undocumented status. Lies have a rhythm. They stumble at the edges. I pressed, gently, asking for the boy's birthday, his school. She fumbled again. My skin prickled. A mother knows those details without pause. When I asked if she had other children, her eyes narrowed. "He's the only one that matters." The words came fast, sharp, final. Before I could respond, a young man burst through the automatic doors of the ER. He was maybe in his late teens, tall, wiry, sweating through a dirty t-shirt. Security moved toward him, but he shouted, "That's my brother." "Where's my brother?" His voice cracked with desperation. I turned to the woman. Her face had gone ashen. She shook her head violently, almost imperceptibly, as if begging me not to acknowledge him. Then she rose to her feet, her voice low and controlled. "Don't let him in." I didn't move right away. My instincts screamed that something was off, but my training told me to de-escalate. I walked quickly to the young man, asked for his name, his connection. He gave the boy's name without hesitation, the same name the woman had struggled to produce minutes before. He knew the birthday, too. His hands shook as he tried to give me more details, pleading to see his brother. Behind me, I could feel the woman's stare burning into my back. I told the young man to wait, that I needed to confirm things. Security stood between him and the hallway. He kept repeating, "He's my brother, please. Let me see him." When I turned back to the woman, she sat again, perfectly still, her hands back around her purse, her eyes cold. "He doesn't belong here," she said softly. "None of them do." A chill moved through me. I didn't know what she meant. None of them? Who was she talking about? But the conviction in her voice, the eerie calm, lodged inside me. I excused myself under the pretense of checking with the doctors. I stepped into a supply closet and shut the door, my hands trembling. I had mediated families before, estranged parents, custody battles, siblings arriving at odds, but this felt different. This felt like I had stepped into a secret I was never meant to hear. The boy's body was broken in a way medicine might mend, but the fractures in his family ran deeper. And as I leaned against that door, heart racing, I knew that whatever truth waited beneath their silence was far darker than any chart or monitor could reveal. The waiting room is always loud, always restless. But when two stories collide, when one voice insists and another denies, the noise shifts. It becomes a kind of pressure in the air, a pulse under the fluorescent lights. That night, I felt it as the young man paced just beyond security's reach, his voice raw from shouting, while the woman sat unmoving, her gaze locked on the floor. Everyone else in the waiting area grew quiet, as if instinctively aware that something was unraveling. I walked back to her, careful, steady. "He says he's the boy's brother," I told her, keeping my tone neutral. "He knows details. Can you help me understand?" Her eyes lifted to mine, dark and hard, and for the first time I saw fear flicker there. But it wasn't fear of losing her child. It was fear of exposure. She shook her head once, sharply. "He doesn't belong here." "None of them do." The words again. The same strange phrasing. "None of them." I felt my stomach tighten. I pressed gently. "If he's not family, who is he?" Her lips curved into something between a sneer and a plea. "He's nothing." I excused myself again, my chest heavy. I approached the young man. His clothes smelled of sweat and cigarette smoke, his hands trembling as he rubbed them against his jeans. "I'm telling you the truth," he said, his eyes darting between me and the hallway where his brother lay. "That's my little brother in there. His name is Aaron. He's 13. I raised him more than she did." "She?" I asked. He nodded toward the woman. "Our mother." The certainty in his voice rang louder than her flat denials. "I've learned to read grief, to read lies." His urgency wasn't rehearsed. It was raw, spilling out faster than he could contain. "I need to see him," he said again, his voice breaking. "He's going to ask for me." My mind swam with conflicting responsibilities. Protocol demanded clarity before allowing anyone into trauma 1. But the truth was already bleeding through. A boy with broken bones, a mother who spoke in riddles, a brother locked out and frantic. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something enormous, a cliff crumbling under my feet. I made a choice. I asked security to let him wait in a smaller consultation room, away from the woman. He resisted at first, but I promised I'd bring him news. His hands were shaking so badly by then that I guided him by the elbow, afraid he'd collapse. Once inside, I asked him to breathe, to tell me everything. He told me about nights when their mother disappeared for days, sometimes weeks, about hiding food in drawers for his brother, about the way she'd speak in strange fragments, warning them not to trust outsiders, telling them to lie if anyone asked too many questions. He spoke fast, his words tumbling over each other, but his details were precise. The name of Aaron's school, the color of the bike he was riding, even the scar on his left knee from falling off the porch last year. As he talked, I felt something inside me sink. This was not the rambling of a stranger trying to insert himself into a tragedy. This was lived memory. This was family. When I returned to the woman, I tried again. "He knows too much," I said softly. "He knows details only family would know." Her hands tightened on her purse until her knuckles whitened. Then, slowly, she lifted her eyes to mine. "He shouldn't have been born," she said, her voice cold, matter-of-fact. "Neither of them. Mistakes don't count as family." My skin prickled. The words cut like glass, spoken not in grief but in disdain. I had no script for this, no training that told me how to sit with a mother who disowned her children in the very moment one fought for his life down the hall. Before I could respond, the doors to Trauma 1 slid open and a nurse hurried toward us. "He's asking for his brother," she said breathlessly. "He woke up. He asked for him by name." The woman's face twisted, her composure shattering. She rose so quickly the chair clattered behind her. "No," she hissed. "Don't let him in there. Don't you dare." The nurse looked at me, confusion written across her face. The waiting room seemed to tilt, all eyes on us. I felt the weight of choice pressing into my chest. Whose truth did I honor? Whose voice guided me? I thought of the boy's eyes, fluttering open, terrified, searching for something familiar in a world of machines and strangers. I thought of the young man's trembling hands, his desperate insistence that he'd raised his brother more than she had. And I thought of her voice, flat and cold, declaring them mistakes. I took a breath. "He has the right," I said quietly to the nurse. "Bring his brother in." The woman lunged forward, her hand clutching my arm with surprising strength. "You don't understand," she spat. "If he goes in there, everything unravels. You'll regret it." Her words sent a chill through me, but I didn't falter. I gently pried her fingers from my sleeve, signaled security to step closer. She stared at me, eyes blazing with something between fury and desperation, and then she whispered, so low I almost missed it. "Secrets are safer than truth." The nurse returned to escort the young man. He stumbled toward Trauma 1, shoulders shaking, eyes wet. The woman collapsed into her chair, her purse still clutched, like a lifeline. Around us, the ER buzzed on, but to me, everything narrowed. The fluorescent glare, the hum of the air vents, the pounding in my chest. I knew in that moment that I had crossed a line. Not a legal one, not even a professional one, a human one. I had stepped into the core of a family secret, and the weight of it pressed down so heavily I could barely breathe. And as I watched the young man disappear into the room where his brother lay, I realized something that would stay with me long after that night. Sometimes the greatest wounds in the ER aren't the ones doctors can see. They are the hidden fractures in families, the lies carried like heirlooms, the truths too heavy to be spoken aloud. But this truth was only beginning to surface. And what came next would mark me forever. I followed them down the hallway, my steps heavy, each one echoing like a drum beat in the sterile corridor. The nurse pushed the door open, and the young man, his hands trembling, his shoulders hunched, stepped into Trauma 1. The monitors beeped steadily, machines sighed in rhythm, and the air smelled of antiseptic mixed with the faint metallic tang of blood. The boy lay still, his face pale but conscious, his legs stabilized in a brace, IV lines snaking from his arms. His eyes opened the moment his brother entered, and in that instant the fear drained from his expression, replaced by relief, so pure it broke something in me. He whispered, barely audible, "Caleb." The young man, Caleb, crossed the room quickly, stopping just short of the bed, afraid to jostle the wires and tubes. "I'm here, Aaron," he said, his voice cracking, the words soaked in a lifetime of responsibility too heavy for someone his age. "I'm here." Aaron's small hand lifted, searching, and Caleb took it in both of his. For a moment, the chaos of the ER fell away. No beeping monitors, no rushing staff, no fluorescent glare. Just two brothers clinging to each other as if the world might rip them apart again at any second. I stayed near the door, trying to give them privacy, but I couldn't look away. Caleb leaned close, whispering things I could barely hear. Promises, apologies, reassurances that he'd keep Aaron safe. It was the kind of language parents usually offer their children, not siblings. The weight of it sank into me. This wasn't just a brother visiting his injured sibling. This was a boy who had carried the burden of fatherhood, protector, provider, and now feared losing the only family he trusted. Outside, I knew the woman was waiting. I could almost feel her presence through the walls, pacing, calculating, unraveling. I excused myself quietly, telling the nurse to page me if needed, and stepped back into the waiting area. She was standing now, her purse still clutched tight, her eyes scanning every face in the room like a cornered animal. When she saw me, she moved quickly, her voice sharp and urgent. "You let him in there, didn't you?" I didn't answer at first. Instead, I asked, softly but firmly, "Why didn't you want him near Aaron?" Her jaw tightened, her lips curling into something, between a sneer and a smile. "Because he'll tell lies," she said. "He always does. He'll poison him against me." I took a slow breath. "What kind of lies?" Her eyes narrowed. "That I don't love them, that I left them, that I—" She trailed off, her face tightening as if the words were knives against her throat. Then she spat. "But I gave them life. That should be enough." The room seemed colder in that moment. Families around us shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to listen but clearly unsettled. I felt the truth hovering, heavy, waiting to break free. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "They need more than life," I said gently. "They need safety. They need love. They need honesty." Her face twisted. "Honesty?" she hissed. "What good has honesty ever done anyone? Do you think anyone cared about honesty when I was their age? When I was left with nothing? Secrets are survival. Secrets keep you alive." Her voice rose, trembling with fury and despair. Security drifted closer, sensing the volatility. I held up a hand, trying to keep them at bay. This wasn't about force. It was about truth bleeding out from the cracks of a broken woman. She sank back into her chair, trembling, muttering under her breath. I caught fragments. Not supposed to happen. Not supposed to be here. They weren't meant to. The words tangled, but the meaning pierced through. I returned to the consultation room, where Caleb now sat beside Aaron's stretcher. Aaron's small voice carried weakly through the hum of machines. "Don't let her take me." The words chilled me. I knelt beside the bed, trying to meet his eyes. "Aaron, can you tell me what you mean?" His gaze darted to Caleb, then back to me. His lips quivered, but no words came. Instead, Caleb's jaw tightened, his voice low but firm. "She doesn't want us. She never has. She tried to leave us behind. More than once." Aaron nodded weakly, tears sliding down his pale cheeks. She said, "Mistakes don't get second chances." I swallowed hard. The phrase again. The same one she had used. Mistakes. Not children. Not sons. Mistakes. I excused myself quickly, heart pounding, and stepped into the hallway. For years, I'd sat with families in crisis. Domestic violence, addiction, sudden death, abuse. But this was something more insidious. This was a mother who had stripped away her children's humanity, reduced them to accidents, burdens, shadows she wished gone. I leaned against the wall, staring at the scuffed linoleum tiles, hearing her words echo against the boy's whispered plea. "Don't let her take me." I knew then that the real emergency wasn't just in Trauma 1. It was in the waiting area, in the purse clutched like a shield, in the secrets she believed were safer than truth. The night stretched on. Doctors came and went, updating charts, stabilizing Aaron, preparing him for surgery to repair the leg shattered by the car. Caleb stayed by his side, refusing to leave, his hand never letting go of his brother's. And outside, their mother grew restless, agitated, demanding updates she barely listened to. She asked when she could take him home, her voice sharp, impatient, as if the ER were an inconvenience rather than a lifeline. Morning light in an ER doesn't feel like relief. It seeps through high windows in thin gray ribbons, making the fluorescent glare harsher, not softer. By the time dawn pressed against the hospital, Aaron had been taken to surgery. Caleb sat hunched in the waiting area, his face buried in his hands, exhaustion and dread etched into his frame. Their mother, the woman who had first whispered he wasn't supposed to be here, paced the room, her purse swinging at her side now like a weapon instead of a shield. The surgical team came through, brisk and professional, assuring us that Aaron was stable, that his injuries, while severe, could be repaired. Relief should have flooded the room, but it didn't. Not for her. Instead of gratitude, her first words were, "When can I take him home?" The surgeon hesitated, glanced at me, then replied carefully, "It will be some time. He'll need monitoring, rehabilitation. He won't walk for weeks." Her jaw clenched. "He doesn't need that. He needs to be with me." I watched Caleb lift his head, his eyes bloodshot but burning with something fierce. "He's not going anywhere with you," he muttered. His voice was low, but sharp as broken glass. Her head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing. "You think you can decide? You? You're just a boy." Caleb rose then, taller than I realized, his shoulders squaring. "I've been more of a parent than you ever were." His voice cracked, but the truth in it filled the sterile room, silencing everything else. She lunged forward, hissing, "You don't know what it costs. You don't know what it takes to carry mistakes like them." The word again. Mistakes. The way she spat it, not as an admission of error but as a label she had carved into their very existence. Security shifted uneasily near the doorway, ready to intervene. I stepped between them, my voice firm but calm. "This isn't the place. What matters is Aaron's safety." But even as I said it, I knew that safety wasn't guaranteed by IV lines or surgical repairs. Safety had to mean more than the absence of physical harm. It had to mean freedom from being branded as unwanted by the very person meant to protect you. Caleb's fists clenched at his sides. His voice dropped, steady now, dangerous in its clarity. "Tell her," he said to me, "tell her what you already know. She doesn't want us. She never did." The woman's face hardened into stone, her silence speaking louder than denial. And in that silence, the truth hung in the air. 2 children born into a world where their mother saw them not as gifts, not even as burdens, but as reminders of her own pain, reminders she longed to erase. I thought of the hurricane that had taken my home, the way the floodwaters erased streets, histories, entire neighborhoods overnight. I had learned then that survival sometimes meant clinging to scraps, finding life in ruins. But what do children cling to when the storm is their own mother? That morning, I did what my training allowed. I called Child Protective Services. I documented every word, every action, every contradiction. The official reason would be safety concerns, potential neglect, and emotional abuse. But privately, I knew it was something harder to name. A fracture in the very foundation of family, a rot that could not be ignored. When they came, she didn't fight. She sat stiff in her chair, lips pressed tight, eyes burning with hatred. Not at herself, not at the world, but at me, for exposing what she'd kept buried. As they escorted her out, she turned once, her voice low, venomous. "You think you saved them. But secrets don't die in hospitals. They follow." Her words struck deeper than I wanted to admit. Caleb stayed with Aaron through recovery. I watched him sign forms with a shaky hand, watched him ask questions most adults forget to ask, watched him cling to the role of protector with a desperation that broke my heart. They were boys, but they had been forced to live as survivors, as shadows in their own home. When my shift finally ended, I walked out into the humid Alabama morning. The air felt heavy, damp, the kind that sticks to your skin. I sat in my car, hands on the wheel, unable to turn the key. I replayed it all. The woman's cold words, Caleb's trembling defiance, Aaron's plea not to be taken back. Families often break in the ER. Death, tragedy, violence, they tear at the seams. But this was different. This was a family already broken long before the car ever hit Erin's bike. And still, I couldn't shake her final words. Secrets don't die in hospitals. They follow. She was right. In the years since, I've carried many cases with me, but none like theirs. I can still see Erin's pale hand reaching for his brother's, still hear Caleb's raw voice insisting he was more of a parent than she ever was, still feel the weight of her whisper in my ear. He wasn't supposed to be here. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if what haunts me most isn't the cruelty of her words, but the flicker of truth in them. Not that the boys were mistakes, but that life itself can be cruelly indifferent, dropping children into storms they never asked for, leaving them to cling to whatever raft of love they can find. I was a social worker in the ER. I was trained to help families navigate crisis, to offer resources, to guide them through the worst nights of their lives. But that night taught me something darker. Sometimes the crisis isn't the accident, or the illness, or the injury. Sometimes it's the family itself. And when that's true, there are no sutures, no splints, no medicines strong enough to mend what's been broken. The case will always remind me that what haunts us most isn't what happens under the fluorescent lights of the ER, but what those lights reveal and what they cannot repair.